Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Story. I'm very pleased to have my boss, good friend, business partner, Jeff Callaway, joining us. Jeff, why don't you share a 30-second, 60-second bio with the listeners about kind of who you are and what makes you tick?
Well, thanks for having me, David, first of all. Right now, I'm the CEO of a company called Medica, which is a Canadian medical cannabis-focused company. So we've got a cultivation facility here in Alberta. And our plan is, and this is what we're in the midst of developing right now, is another facility in Malta, actually, just south of Sicily in the Mediterranean. Beautiful country. And very wonderful people to work with. Government's fantastic over there. And ultimately, we'll process our medical grade cannabis over there and then ship it off into the really strongly growing European medical markets, particularly Germany. A little bit more background. I mean, I was in finance for probably 20 years, roughly. David and I actually came to know each other through politics. I was pretty heavily involved there for about 10 years. All as a volunteer, just trying to do my part to give back. Although politics, I always told people it's the messiest, ugliest, most difficult way to contribute back towards society, but it's also you have the greatest impact. You know, I mean, it's all wonderful if you want to go and volunteer at a homeless shelter, but if you actually want to change the course of society for the better, politics is the way you need to do it. So
yeah, well, and you played a huge role in the Wildrose party and basically the in some ways, I guess, the uprising of the value-based conservatives in Alberta. But before we get to that, we ask all our guests, and I got to ask you, what do you love about this country?
It's interesting. You know, one of the things that's at our facility out here at High Ground is I get the chance to work with my mom and my stepdad, and it's great to have that family kind of connection in our business. But my mom is actually the product of a World War II, in essence. My granddad was in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was a park ranger for a long time, and my grandma was in the Shetland Islands where he was stationed. And, it's kind of interesting. My grandma fell in love with this Canadian flyboy. And, she'd never been more than 2 miles from the ocean, being from the Shetland Islands. He sent her an engagement ring 2 years after the war ended. She got on a boat, sailed across the ocean, got on a train, and and took a train across the country, ended up in Jasper. And this, instead of the Canadian flyboy that she'd met known 2 years previous, out comes this park ranger guy with a bushy beard, all rustled up, riding a horse with a gun in tow. And oh my God, this is your fiance. And then it's kind of the story of so many people and how we've come to Canada and created our lives and just the opportunity that it's granted us. And I think it's really contributed to kind of a common work ethic and respect and that we have as Canadians. And I sort of see that in many of the immigrants who come to the country today. They have that same kind of dream and hope for a better life and to create a better life for their family. And that's always inspiring to people. And that's part of the inspiration of what I think Canada is. So,
I love that answer. I knew you would have a good one, but I also, you've told me that story before, and I absolutely love that story. I think it's such a Canadian story, to be honest, of this adventurous woman who just gets on a boat and is like, all right, I'm going to go marry this guy. Like that people don't do those things.
Not only did she cross the ocean, she then crossed the rest of the country.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Why don't we go chronologically here? Talk a little bit about your time in finance, but obviously through the lens of what Canada is from an economic perspective, how interacting with so many different businesses, what that kind of taught you about business, but also about, what our country is, what makes it tick. You've become kind of an expert at navigating the regulatory world and everything that happens here. But like, you were kind of in the heart of funding the Canopy and Aurora, and you've seen businesses come and go. Share with us a little bit, like, what is that like from just a personal perspective on like a career, but also, life vision, but then also what you kind of see on the more macro scale of the Canadian economy.
There's that's a huge question, and it's a good thing we have 4 hours.
Yeah.
So bring me back on track, but I'm going to kind of go back a little bit. So I grew up on a dairy farm just outside of Calgary. That was great discipline as far as what kind of builds your character. You got to milk twice a day, cows twice a day. It doesn't matter if your leg's broke, you got to milk the cows. And I can say that because my dad fell off the Quonset, broke his leg, and we still had to go milk the cows.
Right.
When I was young, my parents were actually splitting at the time. It was a difficult time, and so I had to grow up pretty early. And so I was milking cows when I was 13. I was filling the loft with bales, all that kind of stuff. So the point is, from a very early age, it just kind of instilled in me a deep sense of responsibility about you just have to go and do what you need to do to get the job done to keep things going. And then as my grade 11 year, I was an exchange student, lived in Norway for a year, and a wonderful family I lived with over there. I consider them my family to this day. And then they kind of gave me the idea to get interested in politics, which is kind of where that came from. And then my first year at university, I went to the University of Calgary and got sort of teamed up with some of the political people. I was kind of interested, didn't really know anyone. But that was also the fall that there was the Quebec referendum on separation. And, of course, that just barely passed for the no side or against separation. And so that kind of really inspired me to get involved at that point. And I made a lot of lifelong friends. In fact, actually, it's interesting. One of my friends today from that time was Pierre Polyev. And we were both at the USP together, right? And we were, political science club nerds.
Yeah, I know those people. I'm also a political science nerd.
Yeah, right. So I was doing that, and then I was also going to do double major in finance, but I was able to get it wasn't poli-sci, but it was an international relations degree, but I loved finance and business. And then I got a job working at Royal Bank Dominion Securities, and the guy who hired me was actually a wannabe farmer, and I was a farm kid, so we just kind of hit it off, And actually, at the end of that summer, he said, "Jeff, it's really been nice having you work here for the summer, but I want to wish you well on your future studies." And I said, "Well, Rob, thank you, but I've actually scheduled my classes on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Wednesday evenings. So I'll see you on Monday." And I came back to work on Monday. I sat down on my computer. My login still worked, and they kept paying me, and I kept working. And then I just kind of went from there. So, sometimes there's those bold moves that you have to take in life. And, I sort of look at things as like, well, they can only say no.
Right. I love that. That is such a good mentality. Can you go a bit more into that? Like, because that is a really important philosophy I think people need to get a hold of.
Yeah. Like, one of the things in life that I just think is really just so crucially important is you've got to kind of grab hold of the opportunities as they present themselves. You've got to be able to identify them. You've got to do enough homework beforehand so that A, you recognize them, B, you recognize the ones that you shouldn't take. And then also that you're prepared enough to kind of grab hold of them when they do present themselves and actually be successful at it. And the other thing is, none of us are ever fully prepared to actually take on a task in front of us, perfectly trained, perfectly educated, all of perfectly prepared. You've got to actually just try and go and make it happen and just do what you need to do. So I kind of come back to that old farm story, right? When your leg's broken, you got to milk the cows. You just gotta figure out a way to get the job done. So, I did that at the same time. When I did that move and I was basically working full time, I still hadn't finished university. So I remember my last semester of university, I literally slept every second night because I was either working or going to school and writing papers and
every other night. Wow.
Every other night. Yeah, literally. So, yeah, I'll say the dating life wasn't very good at that point.
Fair enough. Well, you got it. We recently had Vincent Guzzo, the dragon, on, and he said you got to decide what you're going to fail at.
Yeah.
If you really want to be a true entrepreneur, you have to make sacrifices, and I thought that was pretty profound. And you're basically saying exactly the same thing. Your dating life wasn't very good, but you're like, I'm making money and I'm doing school. I'm.
You know what? And I think one of the things when you're an entrepreneur, you have to have that fulfillment about what you're doing.
Yes.
And I know this sounds really, really corny, but this was extremely true of my time in finance, and it's a big driver when I was involved in politics. I was president of the Wildrose and all that. And then also now that I'm running High Ground, is I have a deep sense of responsibility to the people who are reliant on me, either for their job or their paycheck, or the people who are believing in a cause and believing in principles. And I have a deep sense of responsibility that I don't want to see that betrayed or let those folks down. To be honest, it's probably almost like something that gives me a bit of anxiety, maybe at time, or it is almost like an insecurity, I guess, in some ways, that I don't want to let people down. And that's when you look at some of the really successful people out there, I think that's not necessarily totally uncommon. They may appear completely confident and completely have it all together and be, world domineering successes, but they oftentimes have psychological issues that
well, it's that crippling sense of burden, of a weight, right? It's like, but not in a bad way. It's like you're carrying something heavy, which is the hopes of others.
Like Elon Musk, right? Like, so he was on SNL here, 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, and one of the things he said there was, I'm a guy and I say some weird things, but, I have plans to convert all of our internal combustion engines over to electric vehicles, and I'm going to fly to the moon. Like, do you think I'm really kind of a normal guy?
Exactly. Well, and I think, like, who wants to be normal? Like, I know some people do, but lots of people, I suppose. But if you don't, like, if you want to go out there and you're like, actually, I see other people's lives, I don't want that, I want something else. Well, you can't get that by being like them. Yeah.
And you know what? I think we all in our lives have our different strengths and weaknesses. We have to realize what those are. That's very humbling. It's very like one of those sayings that I know attributed to Socrates, whether it was him or not. But the only thing I know is I know nothing, and that's so true. And I'll tell you specifically where that was never any more true in my life was probably so when I first became president of the Wildrose Party, when I looked at the policy book at the time, we had about 3 different policies on education and 2 different policies on healthcare, and like diametrically opposed to each other, but all very
but all in the book,
40-page policy document book. And I thought, well, this just is no good. So anyway, we were just a tiny little party at the time. We were 1,000 names on a spreadsheet. We had no office, no MLAs, no money, no anything. So this was just like building a whole new business again. But So I took on the task of rewriting the entire policy base for the party, which I did. And as you really start thinking through the issues on arts and culture and infrastructure and healthcare and education, taxation, everything across the board, and you're honest about it, you really know so little. You may be an expert in some particular area, but if you want to do a proper job that respects what the belief and the foundational principles of what the Wildrose was at that time and became after that, it's a big learning process that you've just got to be humble throughout all of that. So
and that's actually a good segue into let's talk about the principles that made up the Wildrose. Why did the Wildrose come into being? And we could probably talk about why is it coming back.
Well, at that time, of course, the Wildrose was just one of any number of little right-wing parties that get going in Alberta but don't get very much traction. And you had this behemoth political giant of the PC party that had been in government for 39 years or 40 years at that point in time. But the thing was, and this kind of comes from finance world, and where I found a company, co-founded companies, put in finance and taken public, all that kind of stuff. It was just like putting a new business together, but you had to do it in a way that was actually going to end up being successful. So I also wrote the business plan for the Wildrose at that time. I got appointed as, and so the drivers, I guess I should say, for Wildrose, there were a couple of things. One, in rural Alberta, property rights is a very strong issue, and the government at that time was implementing legislation that was going to threaten or erode that. And so you had a lot of meetings in rural areas where people were rising up against that. So there was that. And then in the energy sector, you had Premier Ed Stelmach, who had campaigned on getting our fair share policy, which was expropriated a lot of value and wealth and had a hugely negative impact on the energy business. And the energy business at that time was a major driver of the Alberta economy, still is today, but to sort of a lesser degree because of pricing and troubles of the last few years. Pricing mostly related, but also government related, absolutely. But those were probably the two things, was property rights and the our fair share. So I got involved and sort of put together this business plan, kept it really focused, and then tightened up the messaging. I started engaging with reporters. Like the leader at that time, as again today, was Paul Hinman.
Yep.
But he had just lost his seat as the MLA, and he was going to basically be done. So I kind of took up the mantle and was running everything. Like I said, I was writing the news releases. I rewrote the policy base, redid the website, wrote the brochures, engaged with all the media, focused the messaging. I was president of something like 77 or 78 constituency associations at the time, out of like 83.
Wow.
It was a little crazy. And then plus, I was an investment advisor, so I had a full-time gig at that. So I was very busy. But, I looked at it as kind of like building a business, and we needed a better pitchman, so to speak. And then that's recruited Danielle Smith, and she really did a great job as leader. Refocused the policy base, which I sort of compared putting the party together to like having a Tupperware company where I just wanted to have the best Tupperware, and I wanted it to be in every kitchen and living room in the province, and that appealed to that market. And then we needed some venture capital funding, so really worked on the fundraising. We got our our back office computer database systems all ramped up, whereas like I say, it was just an Excel spreadsheet before. The first person that we paid wasn't the leader; it was an executive director to actually run the party. And you know what? We started to get some traction. And after a few months, as the PC party was, spending like drunken sailors at the time, they like the legacy of Ralph Klein had long left or been left behind. And frankly, that was part of the business plan, was I wanted to cleave the PCs in half and go after the old Ralph Klein PCs. That was it started to play out. And around budget time in sort of March of 2009, I guess it was, I was reading in the Herald, and the Herald's reporter asked some farmer east of Crossfield, well, what do you think about the upcoming budget in the government right now? And he said, well, they've got to get their spending under control, or I'm going to have a real hard look at this Wildrose party. They sound pretty good. Right. And I was going, oh my God.
You're like, there it is.
We're getting traction. Yep. And this is someone that I don't know.
That's a great
I knew everyone in the party at that point.
Yeah.
So, and then, later that year, we had a leadership race, and Danielle won, and we won a by-election. And I'll be honest, I didn't think we were going to win that by-election. It took a total party effort to do that. And, but we did. Paul Hinman won the seat in Calgary-Glenmore at that point in time. And then we got a couple of floor crossers, and, and then we had a really strong chance to even form government the next election, albeit for, some unfortunate decision making in the next election.
Yes, it was close. It was close.
Should have been handled better.
Yeah.
But so anyway.
So then we go through this whole process, and the NDP end up winning, and we merge the parties. We have a leadership race, and now we're in this weird situation where the Wildrose is being reborn. And if you don't want to be too hard on Kenny, I understand, but what do you think is happening in Alberta right now? Obviously there's a lot of anger, but you've been in this like all the way up to your neck until fairly recently. So you know your province, right? What would you say you see?
People used to ask me like, well, what do you do? And I said, like, to get a sense of the pulse then. I said, well, I had a big clientele base, so I talked to them. But then it was like, I could also say, I just go visit family, because they live north to south, east to west in Alberta. And I was the guy who wore the suit in the family, and everyone else is, plumbers or chemical salesmen or ranchers or farmers or just whatever regular folks, right? And just kind of talk to them, see what they're thinking. And that's the thing with regular folks. If you just talk to people with respect and listen, it's not hard, but it's not done in politics. And if you're actually listening to them, like, there's common threads and common themes around just basic principles. And that's kind of what we tried to reflect in the Wildrose, which really was just about, if I had to call it anything, and I wouldn't, but it was kind of like a small L libertarian, fiscally responsible, like fiscally conservative party. It wasn't like, I would say probably where Danielle, really fell down in her leadership was she really went after the social conservatives. And there's 3 stool pegs to keep the party up on the social perspective, and the social moderates, the small libertarians, and the social conservatives. And they can coexist, but each have to treat the other with respect and act respectfully. And I think that's where she kind of fell down at the end, and it really caused a divide in the party. Now, sadly, I think we're seeing some of that happen today with the PC party. That coalition is faltering a bit and is giving the opportunity for a resurgent Wildrose, which, to be clear, I have no involvement with.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Politics is behind me. Okay, it's behind me. But as an observer and a guy who lived and breathed it for 10 years and understands what it takes to build a party and what causes one to founder, I can see the conditions there. And that being said, to be absolutely fair too, it's not that Premier Kenny or whoever was going to be the leader of the UCP inherited a horrific financial situation that you just cannot spend your way out of or regulate your way out of. And I think that the UCP needed to take a much stronger substantive type of legislative, or implement a stronger legislative agenda that actually delivered real substantive reform in Alberta, which I don't think we have. Like there's been a lot of words, but not enough really substantial, tangible change.
Yeah, and I think the voters probably, I think, are feeling that too. It's like, well, what have you done, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a lot that they can point to.
People are tired of rhetoric and strongly worded letters, and building coalitions and lawsuits. I mean, this is government. People actually want stuff to get done, for change to happen. That's what they voted for. That's what they thought they voted for when they voted for the NDP too.
Yeah,
frankly.
Yeah, true.
But last night I was on Twitter and there was someone that posted a comment that said, "Well, it's AHS's fault that AHS is arresting people and they're running the whole show, and show me a law that Premier Kenney brought in to authorize these arrests and different things like that." And I'm like, well, you can't, but the government is ultimately responsible.
Yes,
at the end of the day.
It's about that burden that you talked about earlier. It's about that burden that you talked about earlier,
yeah.
Right? He needs to take responsibility.
Like
he's the leader.
Yeah. He's the leader, and the rest of the caucus are members of that government. And your burden of responsibility should be, to your constituents, and first of all, not just to the government, because you are elected as a representative of the people. So, it's always a tough balance. You can't ever get everyone to agree. The desires and wishes of Edmonton, Strathcona, for example, are different than that of where I'm at today, out in Oyen, Alberta, or suburban Calgary. But that's where you've got to have these discussions with the information on the table, and not just heated rhetoric to actually get solutions across. And at the same time, you know what? Sometimes it just takes a lot of fortitude to drive through this. Now, to be fair to Premier Kenney and the government as well, of course, you inherit this horrific fiscal mess that you've got to try and work your way out of.
And then you get hit by COVID. Yeah,
and then you add COVID on top of that. But you know what? I will say that I think the prospects for the government to recover in the eyes of the general public are probably improving a bit, because we are seeing higher prices for general commodities. Agriculture sector is doing a little better, but the energy sector is also doing a lot better. That's going to generate more cash flows, jobs, activity, tax revenues, all of that kind of stuff. That's going to have positive impacts to bringing the deficit back under control, to I hate to say this, bending the curve of the debt.
Yes. Flatten the curve. Flatten the curve.
Yeah. I hate that term. I hate it.
So, hopefully we don't go into debt lockdowns or anything like that.
Who knows, right? Who knows?
But, and obviously we're seeing, positive test rates and hospitalizations and people in the ICU going down as well. And that's all going to become, even people going for tests of COVID have dropped quite significantly. And so, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've gotten my vaccine. I encourage everyone else to go get it as well. Because I think that's going to really be our ticket to getting back to a little bit more of a normalized life. Like my office, it's downtown Calgary for High Ground. I'm at our facility in Oyen today, but downtown is empty.
It's dead. It's like a ghost town.
Oh, it's incredible. I'm negotiating with my landlord about taking an extra couple of offices, and it's kind of like it's operating costs.
Yeah, he's not making money off this. He's not making money off this. Yeah,
it's and if you don't like it, I'll go find someone else.
Because there's so much space.
There's literally full office towers that are empty, and then there's these plans to we can convert some of these office towers into residential apartments and suites. But when you think about an office tower, And for those who don't, like, you go up an elevator, and there's an elevator bank of like 6 elevators, and that takes up a certain amount of space. And then you've got all of your plumbing for women's
one,
and a
like,
men's
yeah.
yeah. And then you've got a few offices, that are generally around the edge of that internal workings. So now you've got to actually try and go and restructure
replumb
that,
everything. Yeah,
replumb everything. Like, that's not cheap. These towers were not designed for residential buildings, so it's a little bit of a pie in the sky type of anyway. And so I don't think we're going to see a ton of change on that front. And the other thing too is you can engage in some of those more expensive types of retrofits and that, but Calgary is also not like Ontario or Vancouver either, which have seen these drastic rises in real estate prices. I mean, Calgary, there's and the surrounding communities, there's a lot of flat land to build on.
Yeah, we don't really have a shortage of homes in Alberta.
Yeah. So, it's very much a tale of two very divergent real estate markets in the country. So, anyway, that's a whole other.
No, that's a whole. Yeah, but interesting because we are actually having someone on to talk about the housing market and stuff. So that's a really good point. But we have about 10 more minutes, 13 more minutes. And it's time to talk about our favorite topic that you and I spend most of our days working off of, high ground. But I don't want to just talk about the details. Those are always fun. But I wanted you to talk about the experience of starting a business, the trials and tribulations, the joys, why you pour every moment pretty much of your day into this. What is it about you that loves entrepreneurship, and what does it mean to you?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to believe in what you're doing, of course. I mean, that's kind of an obvious statement. So to be blunt about it, for me, my first year university, I smoked pot a couple of times, and I didn't know what I was doing. I think it might have been stinkweed. Who knows? But it made me feel nauseous and sick, and I thought, well, what the heck? I'm going to pay money for this and to feel nauseous? There's no way. So I didn't touch it. But then as the whole sector started to really grow, and like I say, I was at a financial firm, and we were financing everyone under the sun. And I got to meet all of these management teams, and some of them were just like definitionally tire fires with horrifically incompetent management and no sense of capital allocation strategy or anything. But they raised a ton of money, and they started to build these big, huge facilities. And and so when people say, well, you started high ground less than 2 years ago, weren't you coming into a flooded market? I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I've met all of the other management teams out there, and I want to compete against them. Like, this should be fish in a barrel here. Like, I know my competition. Like,
yes, yeah, you know them well.
Yeah, I mean, I get to bring Sidney Crosby to the Pee Wee Hockey League and skate on my team here. So, like, it's and just with a clear, focused plan, which is what we have, and that's what we're executing on. There's a real opportunity, and there's a real opportunity to, as I think some of the companies that are out there right now are proving, you can operate in this sector and do it very profitably, produce a very good quality product, and the market is just growing, because ultimately, at the end of the day, the two primary APIs are THC and CBD, of course, that come from the plant. And effectively, you can almost think of them as like ingredients. I mean, from a flower perspective, if you're consuming it that way, there's definitely a quality perspective there that consumers are ever more wanting that higher quality experience to satisfy whatever need it is that they're going for. Now, we're medically focused, so for the European market, sort of greater stringent requirements. But, for a lot of people, if you're just buying adult use types of cannabis flower, you can go into a store and you can see these wide ranges of potency from, your range might be 30-40% at many times. And from a quality of product perspective, like you don't go into a wine store and say, yeah, this bottle of wine is somewhere between 8 and 15% alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows?
It depends on the bottle.
Yeah.
It doesn't work, right? So there's a maturation to the industry that we're in the midst of right now. Some of the earlier players are failing or have failed. Sometimes they have strong enough balance sheets; they're trying to buy their way out of their the holes that they've put themselves in, and that's also an opportunity for companies like ourselves that are, have a clear focus. I strongly believe that we're going to be well positioned in that next wave that we're seeing in Europe right now. I don't want to get into predictions because I very much function on the way the regulations and laws are today. But I know in Malta, for example, the government is actually they're going to have on their legislative agenda when they go in an election this fall to legalize cannabis in Malta. Luxembourg is already there. We're seeing in Germany, which is the largest medical market in Europe, that and pricing over there is much higher than it is here partly because of the medical requirements, the stringent regulations. That you've got the CDU, which is in power, but the Green Party, which are strong proponents of cannabis legalization there, are likely to form a strong partner in the new government that's likely to be elected in September. Well, that could lead to not immediately, but gradually ever more dominoes falling towards wider spread authorization of use for medical purposes in Germany, and ultimately legalization. And in France we're seeing trials. Netherlands we're seeing a lot more openness in terms of adult use. People think that isn't it legal in the Netherlands? It's actually not, but it is progressing. The UK is making great strides. Denmark, Spain, Portugal, Italy, of course, Greece. And that market is much larger. So, we're really trying to position ourselves to be at that wave as that really grows. And we've already seen that. Like one of the companies that's in the same complex in Malta that we're in, called EMAP, they were just bought out by Curaleaf, which is one of the top two U.S. producers, for U.S. $283 million. Well, they came from almost nothing about 2 or 3 years ago. And so they've created a lot of value for shareholders. They're primarily CBD focused, but big companies are looking for their stake in Europe. And that's frankly where we're positioning ourselves. And, I'm very confident about what we're doing. I sort of joke that the sun never sets on my business day because, maybe I'm talking to equipment vendors out of Shanghai. I talk to our Malta team almost every day. So, of course, that's 8 hours difference. So I'm talking to them at like 11 or 12 at night and then first thing in the morning. And, and then there's operations here in Canada, too. So it's pretty interesting. And, I think with what we're bringing to the industry in terms of our quality, our processes, and what we're executing on, and then the people that we've got involved with us, it's very fulfilling all around. And so then it inspires you to, really kind of keep going and that. So, that's
I like that's awesome.
That's a long answer. But,
no, that's great. But I want to dig down a little bit into one of the things you're saying, like about how you witnessed all of these people doing something poorly and decided, okay, I'm gonna. I now see a gap. Can you go a little bit, not necessarily into who was doing poorly or any of that, but like, what do you think separates the people who are doing things poorly from the people who are doing well? And one of the things I think that we're doing so well is we're not complicating things. We're going to grow the best product, then we're going to wholesale sell it, and we're not even going to do the distribution, right? We already have people to do that. It's a very simple process. Whereas I find a lot of these companies are trying to do everything under the sun.
Oh, yeah. Like one they shall remain nameless, but people could figure it out before too long. I mean, they were buying and gobbling up everyone. They built massive greenhouses. they bought a greenhouse manufacturer, like just for some premium price. They opened up head offices all around the world. They promised everything was going to be legalized in no time flat because, governments, they act like snap of the finger.
They're so quick at everything that they do.
Nothing ever gets bogged down there.
No. They don't call it bureaucracy because it's hard to get through.
So there was a lot of over enthusiasm, and then I think a lack of sophistication and just business experience. A lot of the early guys were basically trying to take the old illicit operations and then multiply it by 1,000 and would think that would work. Well, small operations don't always scale. Like they just don't. And that's a common theme that we see in business, where you have an inventor of something. They've got a backyard garage operation, and they think they can maybe take it all the way. Well, they've got a great idea. That's their strength. They're innovative. But then it takes another person to actually scale that to another level. And so I think a lot of that really got missed. And, one of the things, I'm not going to say this is true for all greenhouses, but I'm going to say it's true for a lot of them. The greenhouse sector in Canada is just getting smoked right now because for the folks who built these greenhouses, they did it on the basis of, it's a greenhouse. We'll use the power of the sun to offset our power costs, and these will be wildly economic and low cost. But what they ended up finding out is, we actually have seasons in Canada.
Right.
There's longer days in the summer and shorter in the winter. It's cold sometimes, it's hot sometimes, and yet you've got glass walls.
Right.
Well, they're not very insulated. And cannabis as a plant is highly susceptible to environmental changes. So you've got to really dial down on all of those little things. And any master grower, anyone who has any kind of history with the plant will tell you this. Like, you cannot just grow these things like barley in a wheat field, or they are very finicky plants. And that was lost on a lot of the early gold rush mentality management teams, and also financiers and early investors that just lack that understanding. So that's now coming home to roost. But now we're also seeing some of the good operators that are out there are doing a great job of delivering some great product, on a smaller basis, and people are paying up for it. I mean, people will pay for quality, and that's us. I'm quite happy with what our margins are going to be.
Yes.
And the facility that we have, it's huge. It's 133,000 square feet, but we're only building it in phases to match our demand. Well, we're at this stage right now where we almost can't expand fast enough given the demand that we have. So, which is a little different than some of the big guys who are shuttering facilities and selling them off for pennies on the dollar. But anyway, but it's like early days internet too, right? Where
it's like there's going to be the bust, but then the opportunities present themselves. Yeah.
The superior operators.
we got to end this in about 2 minutes, but in a quick 2-minute summary, can you describe the growing process that you're doing and how it's different than greenhouses?
Yeah. So great differentiator. You've got outdoor production, cannabis grown in the fields. You've got greenhouses, which I talked about. Then there's indoor pots and soil. Cannabis is a highly susceptible plant to, you've got to just dial it in your production process. So we use a process called aeroponics, which is no soil, and all of our equipment, we dose and provide nutrients, light, everything is down to the decimal point. It allows us to get 6 cycles a year versus 3 in a greenhouse or 1 outdoor. So we're actually turning our operation into more of an efficient manufacturing operation. That aeroponic process will allow us to get higher consistent levels of THC, which is critical for the medical market in Europe. You've got to have your THC within a 10% potency bandwidth. No outdoor, no greenhouse, and most indoor pots and soil operations can't do that, because even the soil from pot to pot can be different. So our watering system is like a mist that goes up and sprays on the root system, so that every root gets the same amount of water and nutrients. Versus in a pot, you might have a watering stick, and it might be on the edge of the pot or in the middle of the pot. And so I've walked into some of these operations where you've got plants that are just all different heights. And
no, that's not good.
and so when you're a consumer, like a regular adult use consumer, you don't know what you're buying from one package to the next. And in the medical market, especially for Europe, everything is so regulated and so tight that you've got to produce your product through perfection. So there's maybe a handful of Canadian producers that can produce to our quality level, but at the same time, there's only a handful, including us, that can actually meet those European standards. So
and that's the moat. That's the moat for the business. That's the moat for the business. I love that. Well, I wanted to talk about other things, but unfortunately, I tell our guests or our listeners that I try to keep it below 50 minutes. So, very happy to be working for you. Thank you for coming on the podcast. And do you have any questions, Zach, before we go?
No. Just thank you for your time and for all the hard work you're doing. And we're excited for the future.
Exactly. And for all the listeners, we're in the middle of a capital raise right now. So if you are interested in getting some shares and joining us on this journey to building a business and that we're very passionate about, please contact either Jeff or myself. And you can find, Jeff, where can everyone find you on the internet?
www.high-ground.ca.
There we go. Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.